Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the first of the afternoon's panels in honor of the contributions of Jean Lang to Swarthmore College. My name is Joy Charlton, and I'm the Executive Director of the Lang Center for Civic and Social Responsibility here at the college, and the Professor of Sociology. We are here at this session to talk about social responsibility in the 21st century and to celebrate the Lang Opportunity Scholarship Program, now in its 30th year. We can also celebrate the Lang Center for Civic and Social Responsibility, for it is now in its 10th year, depending on how you count the beginning. The Lang Center has provided a focus for the college commitment to social responsibility, a space for faculty, staff, and students and community partners to bring their energies together, and the opportunity to empower students through signature, scholarship, and grant programs. The photographs that you were seeing on the screen before we began, and can see again after the session is over, we will loop them again after the session is over. Those photographs were of some of these empowered students involved in service, activism, advocacy, and social action projects locally and globally. We hope they give you some visual sense of the range of commitments our students make. For it is the lives of our students that we see, it is in the lives of our students that we most clearly see the value of a full educational experience. The Lang Scholars Program, initiated in 1981, was ahead of its time. It was very interesting to me to be reminded that the I Have a Dream program was initiated in the early 1980s, and it is also the case that the Lang Professorship for issues of the Lang Visiting Professorship for Issues of Social Change was also initiated in 1982 and has brought incredible vitality to the faculty and the campus. So the Lang Scholars Program was ahead of its time. Mr. Lang's central idea, to which we still hold, is that undergraduates are fully capable of and are encouraged to bring the power of their ideas to the development of innovative solutions, with the aim of improving the circumstances of those around them. It was truly a visionary idea, which other colleges and universities have since come to embrace. To see this program and the Lang Center as a model for their own endeavors. In its particulars, however, the Lang Scholarship Program remains unique. Thus far, there have been 164 Lang Scholars. Lang Scholars who have completed projects in 30 countries, in cities across the United States, in Philadelphia, and in our neighboring city of Chester. I would like to take a moment to recognize members of the staff and faculty here today who have taken primary responsibility for guiding our Lang Scholars over these years. And if you're here, if you would please stand. Janet Dickerson, who was there at the beginning. Mert Westfall. Jenny Key, who I was hoping would be here. Cynthia Jetter, Melissa Mandos, and Jennifer McGee, who is now the Lang Scholarship Advisor. I would additionally like to recognize those Lang Scholars who are with us today in the audience, both alumni Lang Scholars and Lang Scholars currently enrolled. Would you all please stand and let us know who you are? All Lang Scholars here. Fabulous. I hope all of you will attend the reception and poster session following the second of our panels this afternoon, where you can learn much more about the projects of our current Lang Scholars and other students associated with the Lang Center. Altogether, there will be 22 groups and projects represented, with students standing by, eager to tell you all about the amazing work they're doing. Now to the 4 alumni Lang Scholars on our distinguished panel of the day. We have invited each to speak about social responsibility in the 21st century and social change as they see it and as they have experienced it. I have asked them to speak sequentially in the order in which they are seated, after which we will open the floor to audience participation and dialogue, reserving the very last few minutes of the session to the Laing Center staff for something of a little surprise. The biographies of our speakers are in today's programs. You can read them on the back of your program. So, in the interest of time, I will simply ask you to welcome Vincent Jones, Senior Program Officer of the Liberty Hill Foundation in Los Angeles, Barb Oclock, Pediatrician at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, Lourdes Rosado, an attorney at the Juvenile Law Center, and Jeremy Weinstein, a Stanford University Professor of Political Science, currently serving on the National Security Council of the White House. It's all yours.
All right. Do you have to turn this on? Is it on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me now? No. So good morning, good afternoon, and it's an honor to be here. I, in the course of my short remarks, I'm going to tell you about my week because it's a very a good example of what I think social responsibility is. But I got on a plane last night at 10. Arrived in New York at 6 a.m. and drove down here with a friend of mine who's in the audience. So I'm a little bit tired, but I would not be anywhere else but here to celebrate Mr. Lang. I'm very appreciative of everything you've done for me personally, but also for the world that we all live in. And I was a Lang Scholar. I was in class of 98. And I think in thinking about social responsibility today, in the 21st century, a lot of my viewpoints really were shaped here at Swarthmore and are really embodied in the programs that Jean Lang started. I think the first value that's really important, and actually rather than tell you, I'm going to ask a question. How many of you, besides Mr. Lang, have a personal mission statement? Okay. Because my personal mission statement was shaped by what I believe Mr. Lang's mission statement was to change the world. When I was a freshman, summer after my freshman year, I went to a program where I got a grant from Swarthmore to work for a summer. And there was a speaker who said every person should have a personal mission statement. And that helps to organize and give focus to your life's mission. And then I remembered in the Lang scholarship book, there was a little triangle, a dot, in the world, for change the world. I said, okay, that's a good mission. So I said, I'll change the world or a little piece of it. And for the 19 years or whatever years since then, that's been my guiding force in my life. So I think one very central piece of being socially responsible in these times is you need to have your own mission statement. Because there are so many challenges and so many things vying for our time that if you're not focused and if you're not strategic, you may not be able to achieve the outcomes you want to achieve. And I think in the Lang Scholar Program, that's one of the values that I really took to heart in thinking about the program that I did and the work that I did at Swarthmore was, what do you want to do? And then everything else flows from that. And so I'm kind of talking about the other values that I think are important for social responsibility. I want to tell you about my week. This is not a regular week in my life, but it happens to be like this entire month has been the busiest month of my life for many respects. So yesterday, one of my jobs at Liberty Hill, where I'm a senior program officer, we're a social justice-oriented foundation. We invest in grassroots organizing to advance change, not charity, in Los Angeles. And one of my projects is a project to mobilize African American donors to be more strategic with their philanthropy. So yesterday I had about 120 African American donors in LA for 7 hours and a number of breakouts and workshops and discussions to really give some focus to what are some issues that are impacting African Americans in Los Angeles, who are some organizations that are having some impact and affecting change in those areas, and what can people do to harness their resources as individuals, through foundations, through giving circles, and through other ways to be able to be their part of advancing change. And the that exemplifies a second aspect of social responsibility. I think is really important, is the idea of strategic philanthropy, or being a thoughtful giver. It's not enough to just give money to anything. You have to be really thoughtful about where your money is going and how it's advancing the impact that you seek, especially in these times when there's a lot of need in our communities and a lot of need in the world, and there's a lot of challenges facing all of us. And I think this afternoon when Gene was talking about the I Have a Dream Foundation, he made a promise to a bunch of kids, but then realized that was not enough, and so he wanted to make sure his dream of fulfilling their dreams was going to be able to be realized, and so he gave more and was very strategic in his giving, and that's a core aspect of what I think we all need to be socially responsible. So that was Friday, and that was several months led up to that, but that was Friday, yesterday. Wednesday and Thursday, I also head up at Liberty Hill some work to, the easiest way to describe it is to try to increase outcomes for certain communities, especially Black and Latino boys and men. And we're part of a collaboration with the Gates Foundation, the Magic Johnson Foundation, Knight Foundation, a lot of other foundations, to increase college completion and a number of other issues for boys and men of color. So I co-organized a 2-day convening with about 50 folks from a number of foundations, and we're talking about and trying to envision what it is that we're going to do to be able to achieve these shared outcomes. And over those 2 days, we had a lot of very engaging and interesting activities put together by the Stanford D School. Jeremy should know them. And they're about active thinking, be able to figure out what can we do to harness our collective resources to really see these outcomes. And the value that I kind of take from that, and that I think is important to be socially responsible today, is collaboration. Because while everyone in this audience has done incredible things, and you will do even more incredible things, you cannot do it all yourself. Gene Lang, as he said in talking about the I Have a Dream Foundation, he inspired others to follow his example and to do the same things and have a ripple effect. And we have to remember in approaching the world, trying to create the world that we seek, that collaboration is important, and especially collaboration with people who think differently than you, who may look differently than you, who may have a different experience than you have, because that really makes sure that the outcome is truly reflective of America, which is not really one-sided. So that was Wednesday and Thursday, and on Tuesday, I'm chair of the board of the National Teen Leadership Program. We motivate, inspire, and encourage teens to change the world, and through high-impact leadership experiences on college campuses. And we're the founder and executive director, who's been there for 20 years, is at a point where she wants to step down. But we have to really manage this process to make sure the organization that she built brick by brick and has empowered over 8,500 teenagers, including myself, that it stays around and stays relevant. So we're having a process now to hire an executive director, and we're in the middle of executive director search. So I read about 77 resumes, and then we had a conference call about all of them, and narrowed it down to 11 finalists. And so that was Tuesday, and then Wednesday night, Thursday night, and Friday night, we had interviews with the finalists on the phone, and then Sunday, we're going to narrow down who's going to get in-person interviews. The value in that for social responsibility is it is important to invest in young leaders. And I think that in the Lang Scholar Program, I think I knew that value intrinsically just because of my involvement in the Lang Scholar Program, but as I got more involved in the National Teen Leadership Program, it became even more clear to me how it's so important for all of us to, in whatever way we can, to invest in young leaders, because, and it's somebody the other day on a panel that I was on last week. I was on this panel. Somebody said, if you look around, if you look back through history, most social movements were led by people who were in their 20s. And that's not to say that people who were not in their 20s were not involved, but it tends to be young people who say, I don't want to do it this way, let's do it differently. But by and large, I know I'm young, but from where I sit, I feel that we're failing a lot of our young people. I look at my interns in the office, and even though they're bright, their writing skills are not up to par, in my opinion. I'm biased. I came from Swarthmore. I'm shocked by many students' lack of intellectual curiosity, and I think, of course, there are many students who don't fit that mold. But I think we, as older people, are not doing our part to really make sure that we're creating a next generation that has the kind of the qualities of mind that we want them to have to lead the next generation. So it's very important that we invest in leadership. So it was just kind of some of my musings on social responsibility, and in a way also tells you a little bit more about me and how I've been impacted by the Lang Scholarship Program. So then, thank you.
I'm Barb Oclock, class of '86, and before I get started with what I plan to say, I just wanted to say proudly that I am the pediatrician of a new Lang Scholar.
Oh.
Ariel Feingold is a sophomore who became a Lang Scholar, or found out she was a Lang Scholar over the winter break. So I promised to keep her healthy and health educated so that she can pursue her project. And I sat next to her at the luncheon. It's just karma. So it's wonderful. The highlights of my time on campus as a Lang Scholar were the dinners with Jean and faculty and other Lang Scholars. At these dinners in Ashton House, Lang Scholars would talk about ideas for budding projects or present their final projects and findings. I was part of a group of movers and shakers, people who could take an idea that could change people's lives, and put it into action. But not with some input and opinions from the group, of course. And at the dinners, everyone always had a challenging question about a project's objectives or its implementation that resulted in a more defined, doable, and effective project. What an amazing group of mentors. It's hard to believe that I am now a mentor. Me. Aren't I still at 20-something, finding my own way? Don't answer that. As a pediatrician, when I'm mentoring young parents or adolescents or medical students, I think about the gently probing style, patience, and sincere interest of my mentors, Jean Lang, Eva Travers, Lisa Smellian, Bob Gross, and Em Renninger. As a pediatrician, I try to see the light in a parent who may have a somewhat difficult personality, or a teenager who may have a somewhat difficult personality. And I use what I learned here. I listen. I ask questions, hard questions, in a straightforward manner, and I direct them toward a goal. I am planting a seed for someone to take action or change, just like the seeds were planted here for me. As a pediatrician, I have chosen direct service every day, one-on-one, to help make a difference. And it's not always easy. And some days I leave work feeling beat up. And some days I fantasize about summers at the shore with the only concern being what flavor of ice cream to get at the dairy bar that night. And then I think of Gene. I think of Gene in his office 6 days a week, up and generating ideas and then more ideas, of creating programs that empower people to do and be who they have a right to be, to provide opportunities and practical pathways for all kinds of students to achieve their potential, and those summer beach fantasies disintegrate. I did the math. Gene developed both the Lang Opportunity Program and the I Have a Dream Foundation in his 60s. I have 20 years to go. And then 30 more years after that to continue to give and to look for new ways to approach old problems. Jean remains my inspiration to first think and act on an idea. Sometimes something really obvious or really simple. To reach out to people who know more about it. To make it happen and then to fix it when it's not working right. And to make it the best. Jean, I take this opportunity to thank you publicly. You have changed my life. You gave me the opportunity to attend Swarthmore.
Salem did better.
I'm getting there. You gave me the opportunity to meet the wonderful professors and students whose interactions still influence me today, including Lourdes Rosado, who sits next to me and made this happen, the front page of the Philadelphia Inquirer today. You introduced me to my husband through the Lang Project when, as a fall semester freshman, when I came to Swarthmore because I wanted to do something and I knew people here did things, and I looked around on Parish Hall for the Marxist study group and this study group and that study group, and then I heard about, I went to hear a long-haired, shaggy-bearded student talking about rehabbing houses in Chester. And finally, you have provided me with generous guidance and friendship for almost 30 years. So I really thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. I guess what I'm most excited about is after we're done, all the old friends I can catch up with. I'm so excited that Janet Dickerson is here. I didn't know she was going to be here, and so many other people. So I want to thank the Lang Center for Civic and Social and Civic Responsibility, and particularly to pick up on Barbara's theme, to thank so much Jean Lang, who's been just a constant friend and mentor, and has encouraged me in every step of my career. I really draw on opportunities like these to come and talk with people about social justice issues to sustain me in my day-to-day work as a public interest attorney, which can sometimes be difficult, as we all know. Every job has its challenges, but I actually took a rather circuitous route to become a public interest attorney. Actually, when I was here at Swarthmore, I was very interested in going into journalism because of my work in the Lang Project that I did on popular communications in Latin America, and experiences that I had working on alternative newspapers. I really saw the media, the press, as being a powerful source for social change. And so I started out after Swarthmore going into some reporting jobs. I actually ended up at Newsweek eventually, doing being what was known as a glorified fact checker, essentially, and doing a lot of reporting whenever I could squeeze it in between doing my menial tasks. But you know, I did get an opportunity to work on some stories I cared about. I remember doing stories about things like elderly abuse and undereducation among Latinos, but I also had to do a bunch of stuff that I didn't like so much, and I eventually I was working in our Houston bureau in the early 90s when I had what my husband and I call my Demi Moore moment. I don't know if people remember, back in the early 90s, Demi Moore appeared on the Vanity Fair cover, naked and pregnant, and so my assignment was to go out to a local mall and ask people what they thought about it. And I thought, I've come so far away from what I originally wanted to do, and it was yeah, it just really, you know, drove home to me that in my need or ambition to do well in journalism, I'd really gotten far away from the my original inspiration was, again, to really use the press as a vehicle for social change. So when I got back to New York City, after spending my stint in Houston, I actually started interviewing people that I knew about their jobs and their professions to look for another job. And I really found a bunch of my friends were doing public interest law work. Some of you may remember Jill Chaffetz, class of '86, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago from ovarian cancer. She was executive director of Advocates for Children in New York. People like her just seemed so happy and thrilled with their work that it really led me to go to NYU Law School and become a public interest scholar there. And there I really, I think it was during my time at NYU that it really sort of created my current passion for working on behalf of children who are involved in the juvenile justice and child welfare systems I remember one summer I worked at a small civil rights firm on behalf, and we were working on a civil rights lawsuit that summer on behalf of a teenage African-American boy who'd been sent to a boot camp after he'd been adjudicated delinquent on a charge, and he died there after guards had pushed him down into the ground to discipline him, and he literally had inhaled gravel from the parking lot where they had pushed him down. That was a big turning point. I remember specifically reading the autopsy report and seeing the photos. At that time, boot camps were all the rage as a punitive, rehabilitative measure for kids who got into trouble. Luckily, we know now that in fact boot camps do a lot of harm, and actually they show increased recidivism among kids who are sent there. But there was still a lot of work to be done, and I was lucky again to have many opportunities to work in a juvenile justice clinic at NYU when I was a student there, then to work, I was a fellow at Georgetown for a couple of years where I did indigent defense work and also taught in the clinics. And eventually I found my way to Juvenile Law Center, where I've been now for the last 12 years, which my husband reminds me is the longest I've ever held on to one job. But JLC was founded in '75 by 4 friends who were fresh out of Temple Law School. And they were inspired by what was going on at the time, by the women's rights movement, the civil rights movement. And they started this nonprofit at a time when the idea that children had even rights was just emerging in the United States. And it's a really great story because, and I still work with 2 of the founders, and my bosses. They literally had no money. They set up their legal practices in the spare room of a doctor's office. And they would basically supported their practice in the early years by doing, my boss was a semi-professional umpire for baseball games, and they would ghostwrite editor briefs. And so it was a thrilling time. Luckily, things are a little better now. We're a firm of about 20 people, including 10 attorneys. And in 2008, I'm very proud to say we were named one of 8 creative and effective institutions by the MacArthur Foundation for our work in advancing the rights and well-being of children in deputy. I say that working in JLC is great for lawyers who have ADD because we do a lot of different kinds of work. I do litigation, appellate advocacy, legislative work. We're working on a variety of issues, challenging excessive use of isolation in correctional facilities for kids, ending what is known as juvenile life without parole, which is the practice of sentencing children to, again, stay in prison for the rest of their lives. Fighting zero tolerance policies that push kids out of schools and into jails for minor offenses. We do work on ensuring that state laws provide kids who are aging out of the foster care system with the supports they need to become productive adults. So we do a lot of different things. More recently, we've been in the news because of the article that Barbara mentioned, so I'll talk a little bit about that. If people saw the paper today, there was an article about this judge up in Luzerne County who was convicted of racketeering and other federal charges. I actually first met this judge in 1999. I just started at Juvenile Law Center, and I agreed to take an appeal of a case of a 13-year-old who had been adjudicated and sent away by this judge. He didn't have a lawyer, and he was never told he had a right to a lawyer. It was an easy win, and in fact, on appeal, when the appellate opinion came down, the judge himself, his name is Chivarella, was quoted in the local paper as saying, "I'll never do it again. I'll never let kids appear before me without lawyers." Well, fast forward to about 2007, we get another call from another parent whose child was sent away by Chivarella. Again, didn't have a lawyer. And this was particularly disturbing because the child was adjudicated delinquent on a very minor offense, a 3rd-degree misdemeanor for harassment. She put up a MySpace page mocking her high school assistant principal. And she basically, this was a kid, honor student, never in trouble with the law. Well, she went to trial, no lawyer, was handcuffed and shackled and sent away to another boot camp for a couple of months. We started, and this wonderful mom just wouldn't let go, started calling around. She found us, and we knew this judge. Immediately, our radar went out that there was something wrong here. It was clear that he was still violating these kids' due process rights. We started doing some investigation, found a lot more kids in Hillary's situation, and looked at the state data and found that about the state. Every county has to report to the state their juvenile court dispositions, and we found out that while probably less than 5% of the kids in the state of Pennsylvania appear without counsel for delinquency adjudications, in his courtroom more than 50% appeared without counsel. Moreover, we also found out when kids are adjudicated delinquent, they can be placed outside of their homes. Again, the state, we track by county the percentage of dispositions that result in kids being taken out of their homes. His percentage was 10 times the state average. Because of all this, we filed something in the Supreme Court of the state to ask them to take special jurisdiction and investigate. It was actually one of those times when we were on the same side as the State Attorney General's office and Department of Public Welfare. They came in with an amicus brief saying there's something really wrong here. They looked at the numbers as well. But unfortunately, the Supreme Court denied our petition on the first round. We were in the process of trying to figure out what to do next, because as my colleague says, when you're doing this type of work, you have to be very resilient losers, and we are nothing if not resilient losers in my office. When all of a sudden the world changed for us, and at that point, the U.S. Attorney had issued an indictment against this judge, the juvenile court judge, Chivarella, and the president judge, alleging that they had accepted more than almost $3 million in payoffs from the developers and owners of a juvenile correctional facility up in Luzerne County. This obviously was, we knew something was wrong. We knew that something bad was going on, but no one could have predicted this. When the news broke about the corruption, they were charged both with several federal crimes. Basically, we refiled with the state Supreme Court. And the state Supreme Court then agreed, after the corruption scandal came out, to take jurisdiction. They appointed a special master, a very well-respected juvenile court judge from Berks County. And what he did basically was reviewed a lot of these cases. And we, at Juvenile Law Center, argued, based on case precedent, that because, particularly because he was on the take while he was adjudicating these children and placing them in the same facilities that he was accepting bribes from, that all of the adjudications during that time period had to be vacated and dismissed, which is what the court ultimately did last year. They basically dismissed all these cases and said that because the constitutional violations were so rampant, most especially the fact that children were deprived of their right to be tried by an impartial jury, that they could have no faith in any adjudication that this man presided over. And I think what was particularly insidious, though, was that when children are sent to delinquent facilities or child welfare facilities in our state, the county is allowed to sue the parents for child support, like a non-custodial parent can be sued for child support. So we had a situation where the parents of the children who this judge was sending away to these facilities was paying money to the county to pay the facilities, and these are the same facilities who paid the kickbacks to the kids. The state Supreme Court action couldn't really address this issue. We couldn't seek monetary compensation, so at the same time we decided, and we still have going a civil litigation. We filed a federal civil rights lawsuit alleging Section 1983, which is our civil rights statute, as well as RICO, racketeering charges, which I knew nothing about RICO. I was studying RICO for Dummies 101 to draft this complaint. It was, and that lawsuit is still going on. The thing that came about that was really most interesting, and it really brings me full circle, is that we were in the middle of all this inundated with press calls. Media outlets from around the world were fascinated by the story and appalled by it. We were featured on shows like 2020. We got calls from the Inquirer and the New York Times, but also like places as far away as Australia and New Zealand, and were interested. And it was amazing because we were able to tap into the public outrage about this case, I think, really to influence what happened. I think it was the Supreme Court's action in originally rejecting our petition when we simply laid out the fact that this man was violating children's constitutional rights on a systemic basis. The fact that they denied our petition produced a widespread reaction in the legal community, saying, how could this be? It was only until the money came out that the Supreme Court took action. And I think it really was all of this outrage that the media reported on that prompted the Supreme Court to take this very, very drastic step of vacating. So I really did feel like I was coming full circle because I finally felt that I was using the media for social change. So not in quite the way I thought, but certainly in a good way. So where we are now, like I said, the children's cases were vacated and dismissed. We have a federal civil lawsuit for money damages against the judges as well as the developer and the owner of the facilities who paid them off. The co-owner of the facility and the developer have both pled guilty to some minor felonies, but the other president judge pled guilty to a RICO conspiracy, and he's facing 20 years in federal prison. And yesterday was a very good day at my office because we found out that the verdict came back against the juvenile court judge, who I've been dealing with since '99. He was found guilty on 12 counts, including racketeering, conspiracy to money launder, wire fraud, mail fraud, tax evasion. Wow. He's facing up to 157 years in jail with a minimum of 12 to 15. It was a really good day in my office yesterday.
It's an honor to be here today and to share the stage with such distinguished friends and colleagues. Couldn't be a better week for me either to join a panel on social change and actually take a step back, which I was finally able to do about midnight last night, and think about what's taking place in the world. You see, we're at one of these moments in time, in history, when social change is so visible, so tangible, so concrete, and so absolutely massive that you can't even get your hands around it. You're seeing these changes on television. People in the Middle East and across North Africa are hearing about them on Al Jazeera and tracking them on Facebook. I'm seeing them from inside the White House. The things that so many people thought that they knew, that democracy could not flourish in the Muslim world, that the region's authoritarian regimes were too powerful to be brought down, that people were too apathetic to take to the streets, all of these are being challenged each and every day, each and every minute. And these voices that are calling for change, even if they're in languages that we don't understand, don't really sound so foreign. They're the voices of humble people, human beings, asking to be treated with dignity and respect. Listen to some of these voices from Tahrir Square from last week. You know, tens of thousands on the 25th decided to start a search, a journey for Egypt. And then they convinced hundreds of thousands. Then they convinced millions of people. We were all looking for Egypt, and thank God that we found her today. We have withstood tear gas, rubber bullets, live ammunition, Molotov cocktails, thugs on horseback, the skepticism and fear of our loved ones, and the worst sort of ambivalence from an international community that claims to care about democracy. But we held our ground. I feel as though my handcuffed wrists and my sealed lips are now free. I was so proud. After 30 years of being silent, I was finally walking towards my freedom. We were like dead people for 30 years. Our kids woke us up. They gave us hope. Everything is possible now. You won't see many moments like this in your life. I feel lucky to have seen two. The first was in South Africa in 1995. Thanks to Jean Lang and the Lang Opportunity Scholarship. I was 19 when I went to Cape Town. My parents said goodbye to me at the airport, pretty convinced that they'd never see me again, and landed in a country just emerging from decades of isolation, elated at the election of its first black president, but full of contradictions. Freedom had arrived, but whites retained their positions of privilege and wealth. Blacks were in charge of the government, yet schools in black areas were in terrible condition, underfunded, and without quality teachers. Democracy gave coloreds and blacks a voice for the first time, but they often didn't get what they wanted. It was hard for people to make sense of these contradictions. The luminaries of the revolution were now in charge. Expectations were huge, but the problems were enormous. It was clear that democracy wasn't going to be easy. It was clear that the pathway to economic prosperity would depend on making choices that weren't always popular with the people. And it wasn't always clear that the story would end well. As with the events of the last 3 weeks, I was in awe of what was happening around me. The air was electric with possibility. The changes that were taking place before my eyes couldn't have even been imagined just a few years before. It was in South Africa that I found my passion. I didn't really know that large-scale social change was possible in our time. I'd been an activist in high school. That's how I found my way to the Lang Opportunity Scholarship. But I was sort of a B-list celebrity activist, focused on getting condom machines into the high school. But here I was in South Africa, witnessing the founding moment of a new country. The writing of a constitution that embraced the human rights of all people, one that wouldn't take 200 years to perfect. The birth of a democratic South Africa in which people saw themselves for the first time having a say in how they are governed. The emergence of a South Africa in which blacks could aspire to be doctors, engineers, and high court judges. All of this as a result of the vision and sacrifice of a dedicated few who took unimaginable risks to imagine a better future. After my time in South Africa, I knew that I would spend my life looking for ways to support this kind of transformation in Africa and in other parts of the world. I knew that in this grand adventure of social change, I was going to be a bit player. But wherever and whenever they happened, I wanted to figure out what valuable role I could play. And it was the Lang Opportunity Scholarship that gave me the opportunity to think through my place and my potential contribution for the first time. I was young, pretty confident, and with big ideas about what South Africa needed to make its transition work. Set aside the fact that I'd never been to Africa before. But I'd done my homework. I'd talked to tons of people. I'd worked closely with colleagues in South Africa and colleagues here at Swarthmore to develop a service learning program for colored and black youth from the townships. The theory of the case was pretty simple. South Africa needed to find ways to empower young people as agents of change in their own communities, not simply as voices of protest, the role to which they'd become accustomed. I remember long meetings in the dean's office with the Lang Scholarship Committee, fielding questions about the proposal, responding to their concerns, trying to demonstrate that my proposal wasn't just a good idea on paper, but something that actually made sense from the perspective of people on the ground. One of the toughest questioners is Mert Westphal, who's sitting right there. But also another tough questioner was Gene. And whenever I talked to Gene, and he was generous with his time, and always asked very tough questions, he pressed me on difficult issues. Would this model of service learning translate into the South African context? What impact did I think the project was going to have? How would the effort be sustained when I returned to the United States? Translating something that looks good on paper into practice is never easy, especially in an unfamiliar culture. But I woke up every day during that time in South Africa energized by the challenge. I had 60 students in my democracy classes, and each one had an internship with a local organization. I spent every penny of that $15,000, that Lang grant, developing curricular materials, paying for transport costs so my students could get back and forth to their internships, subsidizing a very poor school that had almost no money, and making very expensive calls home to keep my parents calm. The experience was powerful for me and for my students, many of whom I stayed in touch with over the years that followed. But the program didn't, in fact, survive my departure. I tried everything to keep it going, but the money never materialized. And this was a huge disappointment for me and for the school, and one that I spent years trying to make sense of. I walked away from my time in South Africa asking myself some very tough questions. What is my role in supporting social change in countries that are not my own? How do I ensure that the things that I do actually empower local agents of change and not undermine them? How do I know if I'm having an impact, especially one that can be sustained when I'm gone? I wish the answers to these questions were easy, but these are questions I still ask myself every day, whether in my role as an academic, an activist, or a White House official, whether working in the United States or in Africa. And this is what brings me back to the voices of change that I started with. There's something so powerful about the aspirations of people when they're expressed so plainly and clearly. This is something that Gene recognized when he started the I Have a Dream Foundation. Kids want to go to college, to have an opportunity to do things that their parents could not. And he found an incredible way to engage people in helping kids to realize these aspirations. Before the world exploded around me and around all of us in the last 3 weeks, I was planning to offer my thoughts today about social responsibility in a world that's changed in important ways. I was going to talk about the changing face of American power and how that causes us to think differently about the role that each of us can play in the world. I was going to highlight the meaning of this new period of fiscal austerity that we face and how it's going to test our creativity as agents of change. Some of this stuff is quite depressing, but important as we think about social change in the years ahead. But in this moment of flux, when lots of things feel very uncertain and a bit scary, I think it's most important to focus on the one guidepost we do have in our efforts to bring about change, and that's the power of people's aspirations. We see these aspirations on the streets of Cairo today, just as I saw them emerge in South Africa when apartheid fell. We don't always know best how to support these aspirations, but the sustainability and impact of everything we do depends squarely on getting behind them. This is the most important lesson I learned from Gene, and one that I try to remind myself of every day.
Thank you so much to our panelists. It's so clear that the range of your experience and the depth of your thoughtfulness about it bring very much to us today in our discussion. What we'd like to do is open this up now to questions and answers, comments from Lang scholars, alumni Lang scholars, and current Lang scholars. I'd like to say a little bit more about the program itself. Lang scholars, the program has changed a little over time, but there's some core elements of it that remain. There are only 6 Lang scholars chosen every year. Initially, they were chosen before they arrived at Swarthmore, and now they're chosen as sophomores after a dramatic, lengthy application and interview process. They are supported by a Lang Scholar advisor and by the guidance of the committee. They choose a topic, they propose a project, and they are supported with a summer internship, and then they are supported financially and otherwise as they develop a project they'd like to do in the world that will improve the circumstances of others. In today's world, they call this social entrepreneurship, where we encourage students to be innovative and have innovative ideas, and then to put those ideas into action, and now especially to think about how to put those ideas into sustainable action so that the innovative solutions that we come up with last. It is also true that our Lang scholars work in a variety of fields. They develop projects in education, in public health, in the environment, in media, and inequalities in various ways. And I mentioned earlier they go all over the world and they stay locally. Now, third, if I maybe use my privilege of being the moderator to ask the first question, and then I'll invite you to do the same. I would like to ask the panelists here to talk about a little bit how the world has changed in terms of what is possible to do in a social entrepreneurial venture. I'm aware of the current Lang scholars in the audience as they are developing their own plans to go out and change the world, and believe me, they are planning to change the world, and we're hoping that they will. The tools that are available to them now are different than they may have been in your time. The kind of training they have may be different. But I'm interested to know what, as a panel, you think about what's different now for the current generation of Lang scholars, and what advice you might have for them.
Anybody want to take a shot? I don't know if this is as much has changed, but it's something I've learned from that's very different from how I looked at things when I was in college. And it's picking up on something that Vincent said at the beginning of his talk about collaboration. You know, as a lawyer, I'm set up often to litigate against people and be in a very adversarial position to them. But I think a lot of the good work in social justice really is collaborative. Sometimes I do have to litigate, but a lot of times the work that I'm doing is reaching out to people who have views very different from my own and trying to develop consensus in order to achieve progress on those points, on those common points in our agendas, much following the model of our president, frankly, which is an excellent model. And I think what I'm surprised and disheartened when I still see so many people being uncivil to each other because they have such differing views. And I talk a lot about how that really just shoots themselves in the foot when they're acting that way with people who have very different views. And I think being here at Swarthmore, I was very not attuned to different people's views as I would have been, I think, at a large university. I think that one of the good things that has happened is that there's more diversity of thought on campus, and I think that that is a real plus, because frankly, you need to learn how to deal with folks who have different opinions and different belief systems when you go out there, and so I think that's a positive.
I think something else that's new, and this shouldn't at all be surprising coming from a social scientist, but there's an evidence base for the sort of work that's happening to promote social change in whatever sector it's taking place. And I think, when I was starting as a Lang Scholar, in the early 1990s, I think there was tremendous energy, but much less attention was being put on, as Joy just said, sort of sustainability and impact. And this has always been something that Gene has had his finger on and his pulse on from the very beginning. But over, I think, the last decade or two, we've really begun to track and more systematically assess the impact of various social interventions that we mount. And that means that for young Lang Scholars starting out, there's a lot more reading to do. But that reading can be hugely informative in shaping the interventions that one designs. And in terms of beginning to make the case for a model that's piloted in one place being extended and expanded nationally, internationally, this sort of evidence base couldn't be more central.
And one thing that I would add is, well, in that same vein, I think there is a climate nowadays where I think because of the .com revolution, people apply a lot of new business techniques to philanthropy or to developing social change strategies. And people think of it more as an investment as opposed to just a donation, and apply similar metrics to, for terms of a return on investment and what's the impact. And so I think that has definitely changed, and it helps to make sure that the small grant, but it's a very focused grant with a lot of support, can have more results. And in the past, I think it was just here's some money, do some good work with it, and see what and come what may.
Other questions, comments?
Yeah, I have a question. This one over here. Suggestions as to how what could be done to make, based on the experience, what could be done to consider most effective to carry on, what do they learn?
For the Lang Scholar program?
Yeah,
So Mr. Lang is asking a question, what would be most effective to bring about social change based on what they've learned?
Will be more. Well, for me, I think just the basic model of the program where you're investing in a leader. And I know and this is a true story. When I forgot the exact day, but I remember my year for Lang Scholars, they called people to say that you were a Lang Scholar. I remember I was walking from my 5th period, I think it was drama, to calculus, and David Gonzalez said, "Vincent, right now, if you had one wish, what would it be?" I said, I think to be accepted to Swarthmore, the Lang Scholar. And that evening, I got home and got a call from a woman in admission that said, "You've been accepted to Swarthmore, the Lang Scholar." I was like, wow, because here I am. I was like, all right. I was like, okay, because I was born in Compton to a single parent, and even though I was pretty, determined to go to school on the East Coast, it would not have been possible without the generosity of Mr. Lang. And even though in high school I did a lot of things, I did a lot of things, and I mean, I was a Lang scholar, so I did a lot of things, but I still didn't have the resources to truly make my ideas into action. And I think just being able to come to Swarthmore, to be around this environment, people who are committed to social action and to thinking, to learning, and having the resources to try an idea, and some parts of it worked, some parts of it didn't work, and just be able to try and try and try. And so now, years later, I'm still doing that same thing. And I think if you're planting those seeds, then they'll grow and do great things.
And I agree with that in the sense of it was interesting in terms of these people who spoke at lunch, because I thought, oh boy, this sounds just like my speech, which is just that everything comes from an idea. But what we need to do is put that idea into action like you have, just by saying, of course it can happen, and how to make that happen. So that's what I've learned to just keep through my entire life.
It's such a hard question to answer. I think it really all has to grow from a base of having the values instilled in you very young. And once those values are instilled, it becomes easier then to sustain yourself when things aren't going so well. I think it also comes from one of those values that needs to be instilled is respect that there are different ways to do it as well. And to respect that there are, our next panel, for example, is talking about art as a vehicle of social change. There are many ways to do social justice and to promote change, and you have to be open to that. Otherwise, you may miss the most creative, innovative idea yet.
And the one thing I'd add is the importance of listening. And I think, as I think Johnny's remarks were particularly powerful in terms of, from the commitment that you made to students at the school to getting them to college was a process that involved dramatic transformation in terms of the vision of what it was going to take to get there. And that was only possible because of the listening that happened, listening to each of the students, to each of their families about what was going to be needed, and it was different for each one of them. That's incredibly powerful, and I think the structure that has been built over time in the Lang Scholarship Program here, which needs to begin with an idea, but is an idea that has to be shaped through all these dinners and conversations that all of us remember, the letters that I got from Jean that are still in a file somewhere, pressing me harder on each of these different points, the faculty and others at Swarthmore who were pushing back and really challenging us to think in different ways. If you're not open to that exchange, the likelihood of actually delivering on the objectives that you set out to achieve is much lower. And I think the story of the I Have a Dream Foundation, I think, is probably replicated in every project that you've done, although we heard it in its full description for that project and for all the things that all of us have worked on, where it's both the idea but then the listening as it gets shaped that's key.
Well, I had a question, which first I wanted to say you were all amazing, and it's just a privilege to be able to hear your stories. As a healthcare professional, one of our biggest challenges, and we have no idea how to do this, is how to change personal behavior when it comes to healthy habits and things like that. So I was just going to throw out to you guys, do you have any tips or anything you can share with us in terms of you're interested or you're committed to changing behaviors of groups and societies and organizations on a different scale, but we need help because we're not good at doing that in a healthcare context. So do you have anything to teach us?
Well, so as I said, at Liberty Hill, we invest in grassroots organizing, and at the end of the day, it's most people that are ready to organize, people who are low income and are affected by injustice, and for many of them, it's not in their habit to be organizers. So they're people who are organized and they change their personal behavior to not just show up for a protest, but to do everything that's required to change policies that affect education, that affect healthcare, and so on and so forth. And I think what makes it's not so much empowerment, but it's helping people to see that change is possible, and helping them to see that they can have a role in that change, and motivating them to want to do that in a way that's real and authentic. And I think it's done best by people who are from a similar situation. So that way there's a sense of a commonality that's there. 'Cause oftentimes I think we often approach people who may not do things the way we want them to do it, as if they have deficits. And I think we need to realize that where there are challenges, there are assets. And I think we often ignore those assets, and we should be building on those assets. And that way they see themselves, because when we approach them as having deficits, then they say, well, I'm not as good as somebody else. But if you say they have assets that we're building upon, then they see strength in that and can then grow from there.
I have a comment on that. So, being a pediatrician, start early, like Jean is doing with the health stuff. So this is sort of a no-brainer. But I see it in my personal interaction with patients, and also make it personal. So if a child comes in with a kidney infection and the parents don't want the test done, and I say I want him to have his kidneys when he's 70, and all of a sudden it makes sense. We're not just talking about a one-time thing that's happening right now, and it might be a little uncomfortable test, but I don't want this kid on dialysis by 14, and I say it that direct. So that's individual. And I think just starting early with more of the policy kinds of things is good for the patient and good for the healthcare system, because I've decided if I really talk to parents about patients with 15 months old so they're not whacking them around, it helps me when they're 10 and 12 and I don't know how to fix them. So I really decided that those under 2-year-old visits for me are the times to take the time and hopefully make those changes. Nothing you don't know, but to give us more than 10 minutes per patient, but that's another whole story.
It's so funny. My day job is working at Juvenile Law Center, but last few years I've been president of the board of the Family Planning Council of Southeastern Pennsylvania, which runs all the Title X clinics, and frankly, I'm surprised when anyone can make any teenager do anything differently than what they do. But these folks are remarkable, and I'm sure you're familiar with their work. What I admire most about them is how aggressive they are in finding ways to meet the kids where they are. We've done a lot in recent years, setting up more health centers in the schools. Literally, we have staff who are out at night, meeting with teenagers in different venues to help them learn more about sexual being responsible in their sexual behavior, to get STD testing and so forth. It's really, I think, a lot about how do you change teenager behavior. One thing we've done at JLC recently that I'm really happy about is we've formed these advisory groups of kids who've been in the juvenile justice and child welfare systems, and developed a curriculum to teach them how they can lobby for change in those systems. And as a result, the kids go and meet with legislators in Harrisburg and in Washington, D.C., have testified at hearings on certain bills, and I've definitely seen a change in some of them, not all of them, but some of them have really become much more, have just this insight into their lives now and how they lead them that I think would not have been the same had they not been given the opportunity to express themselves to people of authority and really try to influence how those folks make decisions about their lives.
Yeah, the issue of sustainability has come up a number of times in the conversation, and so I'm curious as to kind of what your take on sustainability is, either why your projects were sustained or were not, and maybe if there's any advice that you could offer to the current Black scholars around that issue.
You were unable to hear the question is about sustainability of projects and if they have any advice.
I work at a foundation and we review grants all the time and we fund stuff, and part of our approach is to invest in similar type of people who are like Lang scholars, and there are several examples where we're often the first foundation to fund an organization, and then we give them training and other support to help them grow over time. And now they're anchor organizations in Los Angeles advancing change for people of color, people who are low income. That said, I personally think, and I think I personally think that sustainability is a great thing, but sometimes you don't need to. It doesn't need to happen. It doesn't need to sustain itself over time, because ideally you will achieve your goal. And so you achieve it in 5 years, okay, great. Why keep it around? But if you achieve it, or if you achieve part of it, and then, as Jeremy was saying, and you're listening to what's going on the ground, and you're changing, maybe your project is not needed any longer. Maybe something else is needed. Maybe you need to shut that down and divert the resources to something else. So I think if you're really listening and learning and being like Walmart in a sense. Walmart wants to sell you as much product as possible. So they're always modifying their practices based upon what they're seeing in their stores. And you need to be narrowly focused on the outcomes that you seek to have to achieve.
I love it. Be like Walmart. It's a bumper sticker. That's not a bumper sticker that I ever thought I'd see. I want to take this question just, again, it's great to take a step back from my daily life, and I don't get to do it very much given the pace of work. And those of us who come into government, when an administration changes, realize that our time is short. We have lots of ideas, things that we want to change while we're in office. And it's always a big question, how do you pick up some things and really get them to the point where they're going to survive after you depart? And that's a really hard question in government because there are a lot of things pushing back on changing anything, right, about the way that we do business. And a lot of the work that I do in the White House is on global poverty issues. And if you look back at prior administrations working on development issues, usually the story is the 98% of what we do is too difficult to change. People are doing things the way they've always done them. The bureaucracy is broken, the processes are all wrong. So let's start something new. And so everyone starts something new when they come into office. And it's an initiative, it's a presidential initiative. It lasts as long as it lasts. Some of them die, some of them live. It was interesting, in the global development context, but I think it's also been more broadly true in this administration, we thought that didn't make a lot of sense, right? Because actually, doing things right with the 1% when the 99% isn't being done in the most effective way just means you're losing the opportunity to use investments and policies that the U.S. has wisely to really help poor people around the world. But getting the government to really turn the ship around and to do business differently, whether it is evaluate the impact of any investment that we make. Sounds like a really simple idea. The U.S. government hasn't been doing it for 10 years in development. Almost no evaluations of the impact of what we do. That's just one example. Have meant a year-long process of building two things. One, a shared commitment to an agenda going forward. It's not an agenda that we bring on our own, but one that we've really cultivated and shaped with people who are actually going to be the ones responsible for carrying it out going forward. And then finding ways to get it into the system. Like, you actually have to do the hard work of changing bureaucracies, changing the reporting requirements that people have, changing the incentives that exist for promotion, right? All of these things actually matter to take an idea from something that you just pilot, in a corner and show that it works, to being an idea that can actually transform the way people regularly do business. And it's not easy, and check in with me in 5 years and see if anything that we did lasted. But I think the likelihood that it will last is much greater because we tried to take on the big core of what was broken.
I'm aware of the time, and I'm sorry to say we need to move on to the next panel. I'm not sorry to say that. I'm happy to move on to the next panel. I'm sorry to bring this one to a close. And with thanks to, I would like to take the final few minutes for the Lang Center, but first I'd like to thank our panelists for being here. And in these last few minutes, I'd like to speak on behalf of myself and the Lang Center staff. We would like to show our appreciation to Mr. Lang directly for his vision, for his leadership, and for his support. And we wanted to give Mr. Lang something to remember this day by. If you don't know, Mr. Lang's office in New York, his walls are covered with pictures and awards and certificates and diplomas. There's no space on those walls for photographs. But we did want to provide a memory. So we went for new real estate in the office and created a coffee table book for you. And through the magic of the digital age, you can now create your own coffee table book. That is a photo album. And so there will be a copy of this in the lobby for you to see yourself. On the cover is a picture of the Lang Center in front and in the back. You'll be happy to know that the inside flap has the dogfish story there, which is indeed where it all started. There are photographs of Mr. Lang as a college student.
You got me worried.
There are photographs of some people in the audience and even on our panel as young people. As younger people at Swarthmore. But most of all, the book is full of pictures of faculty, staff, and mostly students who have been around the world and spent many hours continuing the work that you initiated. And we want you to know how much we appreciate it.